Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Agrifood Tech in India Disruption Opportunity webinar. Namaste, welcome. My name is Davinia Lamme. I'm a director at Agrifood International, and I will be your moderator today, together with my colleague from India, Ed Dixon. Before we start, we have a couple of small rules for this webinar. It's going to be recorded, so please be aware of that. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat box. And after the presentations of today, we will provide you with answers. Well, today we have some very interesting speakers for you. First of all, we'll start with a presentation from Ishira. Ishira is our food and agriculture expert from Lari's partner Sonomas 4 in India. She will talk about general developments in agri-food tech and things that are happening in the landscape. Afterwards, you will get a presentation from Mark Khan. He's the managing partner of venture capital company Omnifor. I'm very, very pleased to have him on board, especially the theme for today, disruption opportunities. I think Omnifor is really into that space, and he will share some interesting examples of his portfolio that maybe can contribute to working with the Netherlands, and also share why it's important to invest in these kind of companies. And last but not least, we have Michiel van Erkel, our agricultural counselor based in the embassy Delhi in India. He joined this post beginning of this year, has a lot of experience in agri and food all over the world, and he will also provide his insights based on what has been discussed today. So, shortly who we are. Next slide, please, short. So just shortly, Agrifood International, we are a business advisory firm. We're based in the Netherlands, but we can't operate without our network that we have in 25 countries. In Asia, Central and Eastern Europe, and Sub-Saharan Africa. We always work with local teams, and in India we do that with Sonomas 4, with headquartered in Delhi. So if after this meeting you need any support with entering Indian markets, or you have any challenges that you face, please contact us, and we will see how we can support you with that. But for now, I would like to hand over the word to Ishira from Sonomas 4. Ishira, please, all over to you.
Thanks a lot, Davinia. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here at this webinar today. Like Davinia mentioned, I'll be just giving everyone a quick overview of the AgTech landscape as it stands today, and then hand over to Mark, who will be going into a deeper dive into some of their portfolio companies, which will give you a better flavor of what's happening on the ground. So, Short, please, next slide, please. So I'm sure a lot of you are already aware about the big picture status of the Indian agri sector, but this is just a quick recap, of where we stand with Indian agriculture today. It contributes to about 20% of the GDP and approximately employs, about 40 to 50% of the population, depending on how you count it. And that's a pretty large number, anything between 500 million to 600 million people. And just this quantum of, farmers out there just de facto makes India the world's second largest producer of fruits and vegetables, and we are also the world's largest producer of milk and pulses. There are some specific challenges that the Indian agriculture has, and what, if you want to call them, roadblocks. One is the small size of land holdings. Over the years, the land holding sizes have been getting broken down generation after generation, and as of today, on average, farmers' land holding sizes are 1.1 hectare. Now, it's important to just mention that there is huge variation across the country. So this is an average figure. Obviously, if you go to certain states like Punjab, you will have like farmers with larger land holdings, but if you go to like Bihar or UP, you will have farmers with smaller land holding sizes. Low productivity is an issue that has been consistent in a lot of Indian farms. I would like to qualify here, it's low productivity and also low profitability, where, there is often like a lot of high cost inputs going in, unnecessary inputs going in. So a lot of excessive pesticides and fertilizers going in where, costs could be reduced. And as well as at the marketing side, where farmers could be getting a better price for their produce. We have a lot of high post-harvest wastage as well, and it's almost 15 to 30% in some products. And if this was not enough, I mean, India is one of the world's most water-stressed countries. According to WRI, it was the 13th most water-stressed country in the world as of 2019. Next slide, please. So obviously, on one hand, like it's bad to have all these challenges, but it also presents an opportunity for innovation, for technological interventions, to surpass them and move forward. And that's pretty much the reason why we are having this webinar today as well, because we as a team are very excited about AgTech in India. And in addition to, the opportunities that present on the basis of the challenges that I touched upon on the previous slide, there are certain drivers also that are present in the Indian landscape today, which make, technology intervention interesting, and it's something that has a good scope. And what are these drivers? So one is we see there's rising demand in the Indian market for horticulture produce, dairy products, as well as livestock produce, which is meat, fish, poultry products. This is interesting because these are high value chains where farmers can make a profit, which kind of makes it interesting for them to invest in technology as well, and work with companies which are doing technology interventions. The policy environment has been changing in India, and a lot of you must already have read or heard about like the recent farm reforms. It has been a bumpy ride, but in effect, the farm reforms are positive for the sector. We could talk a bit about them a bit more later because I don't have that much time right now to go into their detail. But in short, these bills unlock a lot of bottlenecks that existed due to policy in the country in the agri sector. In addition to that, the government has an aim to create 10,000 FPOs, which is farmer producer companies, which creates very good platforms which bring together a lot of those smallholder farmers, the 1.1 hectare, there's just so many of them. So each FPO will have members of like hundreds to thousands of farmers. So it just makes it easier to intervene with any intervention that you have using these platforms. The retail models have been changing in a pretty big way in India over the last few years. And I would say COVID has kind of made all of that, has fast-tracked that process. So almost every offline retail, chain is like going online, all the supermarket chains. In addition to that, we have a bunch of e-commerce platforms, whether it's Big Basket, which is more multi-product platform, to direct to consumer startups, right? Like companies like Country Delight, which do home delivery of, good quality milk, or companies like Licious, which, work with producers to deliver fresh farm to home delivered fresh meat and poultry products. So that has been changing rapidly. Also, there has been a rise in exports in India. We are we're like rapidly increasing large exporter of marine products, rice, even some meat, which again makes it, interesting from a technology perspective, because by default, there is a need for certain traceability, registration. So all of that just makes it interesting for any company that's working in technology. And obviously, all of this is happening on the base of increasing mobile phone and internet penetration in the country, whether it's on the consumer end, but more importantly, on the farmer end. And the recent COVID experience, I think, demonstrated to a lot of farmers and companies that work with farmers that, we have this, there has been a certain mindset in India that a lot of farm related work has to happen physically and there have to be physical touch points, which is of course true. And I don't think that's ever going to go away. But I think farmers and companies realized through COVID that if you have a working internet connection and a mobile phone, there is a lot of business that you could do and interaction that could happen, whether it is information, about cropping weather patterns, or farming advice, or to just buy inputs. All of that could be done just sitting at home, and they don't really need to step out to go to a physical location. So all in all, like all these factors makes us pretty bullish about the agtech sector in India. And because it brings up a host of opportunities, to increase production efficiency as well as profitability in agri supply chains. Next slide, please. So this is a pretty dense slide. I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but this is to kind of just demonstrate to everyone that agtech companies are pretty much active across the entire agri value chain. If you look at the first column on the left, it's basically starting from farm inputs to farming cultivation, post-production processing, handling, distribution, transport, and retailing and selling. And of course, finance and information, which is more cross-cutting across, all the touch points of the value chain. If I go into some of the subsectors, which have seen action happen and a lot of movement. So we see, for example, if you take market linkage of farm inputs. So when I say market linkage, it's like backward market linkage, between farmers and companies. We have companies like Dehat, who Mark will talk a bit more in detail about, and AgroStar, which have created digital platforms as well as physical infrastructure to link farmers to inputs. If you come to farming and cultivation, we have there has been a combination. I mean, so most of the activity in the agtech space has been done by small scale, startups. And that has kind of, I guess one reason has been that large Indian companies are just there's a lot of inertia, to try out new models. So we've seen again, like a bunch of companies in the farming cultivation space, whether it is helping with farm improving, farm productivity or farm management solutions, companies like Cropin, or, companies like Tartansen, which is like a really interesting young startup, which is creating one of the world's lowest cost robots, which can help with farm cultivation. And then we have companies, like Future Farms and Clover, which are going into creating farm infrastructure, helping set up greenhouse systems, to do protected cultivation. So these are, just a flavor of, different companies that are out there, doing stuff. We have seen some larger companies take interest in this. So for example, companies like Mahindra have shown interest, and they have bought in the past startups that were active in precision agriculture or farm mechanization. But largely a lot of the exciting stuff is coming out of startups. So for example, if we go into quality management, traceability, companies like Agrix, Intello Labs, they're using really interesting AI driven models, to help with quality control. Then we have companies like NinjaCart and Waycool, which are acting as intermediaries between farmers and front-end retailers. So basically, they are using tech-enabled platforms and combined with physical infrastructure, to work with farmers on harvesting produce, collecting them, doing basic post-harvest processing, packaging, and distribution. And this has what has been observed is that the largest amount of investment activity has been either in the input space or a lot of this post-production harvest space, where companies like Waycool and NinjaCart have been receivers of some of the highest investment in the space in the near past. We also then have companies, which are doing B2C, so it's front-end market linkage digital platforms like Big Basket, which started off as just directly selling produce to farmers, to consumers. But interestingly, what we are now seeing is that even these companies are realizing that having vertically integrated value chains makes more in business sense for them as well. And this is a larger theme that I would just like to draw everyone's attention to, that in general, companies are realizing that having end-to-end supply chains or vertically integrated supply chains just makes more sense. So if you have a DeHaat on one hand, which started doing just farm inputs, but has been moving more downstream, by not only giving farm inputs to farmers, but giving them advice on how to grow things better, then helping them with harvesting, post-production, collection, and selling the produce. And then on the other hand, you have a downstream product company like Big Basket, which started off just selling produce to consumers, realizing that if they have more control over their value chain, it just makes better unit economics for them. So we have now Big Basket either buying out companies which were already working with doing delivery, or setting up their own infrastructure at the back end. So setting up their own teams and value chains for certain produce to collect from farmers, process them, and then market them. We also have like some, and this is a nascent sector in India, but it jury's out on like how it's going to evolve, which is the plant-based meat sector. And there are companies like Good Dot and Veggie Delight and a bunch of these guys who are trying to bring out products in this space. And of course, we have companies like Samunati, which is like one of the largest players in ag finance right now. And again, it's interesting that even they are going into a more integrated value chain approach, where recently they just took over a company called Kamatan, which works with farmer producer companies. So I would love to go to the next slide. Sure, please. So just to kind of summarize, if we want to just quickly have a snapshot of like the trends and opportunities that are as we see today. So far, the most entrepreneurial and investment activity has been in the input supply chain and marketing part of the agtech value chain, where B2B as well as B2C. We have seen the least amount of activity in biotech or life sciences, which has potential, but we haven't really seen that much action happen there, or even things like farming as a service. At an industry level, like I mentioned, we are seeing a rise of vertical integration, end-to-end players coming up. We are also now seeing the big guys getting interested. So for example, recently Tata acquired Big Basket, which is a good sign, I guess, for the industry, because we are seeing if the big companies are also now, I guess in the smaller guys did the hard work and now the big guys are taking over, but from a larger perspective, it's probably a good sign. And then we also have an interesting trend of startups, Indian startups going global. So you have IntelloLabs, and I was just reading yesterday, IntelloLabs is an investee of Mark, and then one of their other investees I just read yesterday, Eravoka, is also like, has been selling products globally. So that is an interesting lens as well, because often we just look at Indian startups, foreign technology coming into India and Indian startups, applying like what's happening globally. But this could be a new trend that emerges that, tech innovation that has happened in India, is going global. The future growth areas probably in terms of more activity will be in precision agriculture, farm management, traceability, and automation, both at the farm and market level, especially with the rise of private markets. There is a huge potential, to create automated systems. And like mentioned earlier, the sectors with potential, to absorb more agtech solutions are probably going to continue to be horticulture, dairy, aquaculture, poultry, spices, tea, coffee, all the high value products pretty much will probably see the more uptake of agtech. So I'll close at this point and hand over to Ed, who will then introduce Mark. Thanks a lot.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Ashira. Thanks for the energetic start, the coffee we all needed for the beginning of our days. I'm just, you'll hear from me briefly now and a bit more later, but it's a great pleasure to introduce Mark from Omnivore. as many of you will know, a very active investor in funding entrepreneurs in the agriculture and food systems space. Mark co-founded Omnivore and has made India his home for the last 14 years. So really excited to hear your perspectives, Mark. Over to you.
It's a pleasure to be here. We have been active in this ecosystem for quite some time, and really for the last few years have done quite a bit with the Dutch, with the Kingdom of the Netherlands as partners in Omnivore Fund 2 via FMO and the Dutch Good Growth Fund. So we're pleased to see that they're supporting and participating in this as well. I'm going to give you Omnivore's perspective on the ecosystem, which, to be clear, not entirely different from what Sanam S4 presented, but I'll give you our perspective of kind of where things are heading, talk a little bit about some of our portfolio companies and that are doing quite well, and then sort of what we think needs to happen for this ecosystem to continue to flourish in the future. Let's get the first slide up there for a sec. So everything that Omnivore does can be understood through our theory of change, our vision for the future of Indian agriculture. And so what we're looking to do is drive agricultural prosperity, transform food systems, and promote climate sustainability in India. And our portfolio does that really in four ways. The first is we look at companies that are increasing smallholder profitability. The Sanam team talked about the fact that there's about 130 million smallholder farmers, and the average farm size is about 1.1 hectares. And the challenge here is that when you're at that level, making a living is a challenge. Making enough money from that hectare, slightly more than a hectare, you're at a scale of farm that as an economic unit is just barely viable. And if it gets any smaller, it's not viable. And so what we're looking to do, first and foremost, is increase the profitability that smallholder farmers are experiencing. And historically, the way that people talked about doing that was raising farm yields. And so, when I first moved to India in the late aughts, I guess you call them, the way people thought about this, and the way people had thought about it since the time of the Green Revolution, was increasing farm yield. So everyone would show these charts that, Indian rice farm yield is 40% below the global average, or the Indian wheat farm yield is 20% below the global average, or people in Israel and the Netherlands, they get much more productivity from tomato growth, and all of these things are absolutely true, but it doesn't take away from the fact that if we increase the yields, India doesn't actually have the storage and marketing infrastructure or the export infrastructure to manage the surplus. And so you just actually glut the market and you're back to where you were before because prices crash. So while raising farm yields is part of increasing smallholder profitability, it's a small part. The biggest is, thinking of every farmer as being a micro entrepreneur, having their own income statement and their own balance sheet. And so yes, increasing the volume of their production is good, but so is reducing their farm expenditures, so is lowering their cost of financing and securing better prices for the same farm outputs through disintermediation is a key way to kind of drive profitability. So all of these are from the profitability lens. The second lens relates to resilience. And when we say resilience, we mean profitability is a moment in time. But resilience is kind of a time series, right? The challenge in Indian ag is that at any given moment, you might be making money, you might not be making money, but there are massive swings in that profitability that make being a farmer so difficult. And so here we're looking at how to stabilize incomes at that higher level. And that's by providing access to innovative finance, risk management solutions, augmenting sources of income, and improving the market dynamics that farmers have to manage. So those are our two kind of social themes for what we do. And then the two environmental themes for what we do are improving agricultural sustainability and catalyzing climate action. So improving agricultural sustainability is about optimizing the consumption of natural resources and farm inputs and minimizing waste and spoilage, right? Everyone knows how much in this value chain is wasted. And then with respect to catalyzing climate action, we're looking at both mitigation and adaptation resilience. So how do we mitigate the GHG emissions from Indian agriculture? Because it's about 20% of India's overall GHG emissions. And how do we support adaptation, promoting climate resilience for smallholder farmers and food systems, and increasing the area under sustainable and regenerative cultivation? So that's the omnivore theory of change. And if we go to the next slide, that translates into investment across 6 themes: farmer platforms and fintech, B2B agri marketplaces, agri-food life sciences, precision ag, post-harvest technologies, and farm to consumer brands. I would suggest, if people here are kind of familiar with startup and venture lingo, that you think about these 6 themes as 3 full stack themes and 3 deep tech themes. The 3 full stack themes are farmer platforms and fintech, B2B agri marketplaces, and farm to consumer brands. All of them, right, are engaged in transforming the value chain that they play in. Farmer platforms and fintech are digital platforms providing solutions to farmers, including access to inputs, market linkages, advisory extensions, storage, equipment, and credit insurance. They are farmer-centric. But as we know, agricultural value chains in India have many participants in them. So one of the other areas that we work on are B2B agri marketplaces. These are marketplaces that transform the value chains for inputs or outputs, but they're not necessarily farmer-centric. They're working with the intermediaries. They're working with the traders, what we call in Hindi the artiyas. They're working with retailers. And so these tend to be intermediary-centric. They might be working with farmers, but they're focused on transforming the midstream of the value chain. And finally, in terms of full stack themes, farm to consumer brands, these are, not surprisingly, consumer-centric. They are brands, it could be CPG, FMCG, it could be restaurants, it could be e-grocery, and they source from farmers, so farmers benefit from them. And they supply fresh, traceable foods to consumers. While farmers are where they source from, the focus is on meeting those consumer needs. So those are the 3 full stack themes. And if I were to give examples, a good example of farmer platforms and fintech is Dehat. A good example of B2B agri marketplaces would be, from our portfolio, Bijak. And a good example of farm to consumer brands from our portfolio would be Clover. Then you've got 3 deep tech themes, 2 digital and 1 life sciences related. So precision agriculture is looking at deep tech digital solutions on farm. So how do you help farmers raise their crop yields, optimize resource utilization, right? And this can include robotics, drones, IoT, remote sensing, automation. This is digital deep tech for the farm. Post-harvest technologies, also digital deep tech, but focused from the point of harvest onwards. So this would include traceability, storage, logistics, and food processing. And then finally, agri-food life sciences, which is probably the least active part of the ecosystem in India, which are innovative biological products to facilitate sustainable ag or novel foods and ingredients that promote sustainable consumption. This is a space that's massively active globally, and we'll talk a little bit more in India about the challenges with it. Next slide. And everything we do in Omnivore is working towards climate mitigation and resilience. So almost every investment, and that is across a couple of different ideas, which is enabling climate smart production, mitigating the financial risk for smallholders, building efficient supply chains and post-harvest infrastructure, and promoting sustainable consumption. So we have a very strong climate lens for everything that we do. Next slide. So a good example here is Dehat. Dehat's probably the most successful company of ours in our second fund. Have some very, very big announcements coming out. It's scaled very nicely. About now almost 1 million farmers on the platform at this point. I think right now it's about 700, 800K. And Dehat is a full stack farmer platform. So they are providing inputs, they're providing market linkages, they're providing advisory, they're providing storage, and they're providing financial inclusion to all of the farmers on the platform. And if you look at kind of the inputs, they've facilitated over $50 million of sales to organized players. That's now closer to probably 100 million by the time we measure this next. They've almost brought 1 million hectares of land under sustainable cultivation, and then quite a bit of food waste, chemical, pesticide, and GHG emissions avoided. So a very strong environmental footprint being built by this full stack farmer platform. Next slide. Fussell is what we would consider to be not a full stack platform at this point, but more precision ag. So Fussell is a very, very, very inexpensive farm sensor integrated with algorithms and a mobile app. And they focus on what they call progressive horticulture farmers. So they are working with farmers, not necessarily growing rice and wheat, but more progressive farmers growing grapes and apples and pomegranate and many other things as well, coffee, tea, still small farmers, but farmers that by definition are engaged in a more quality sensitive and more profitable value stream. And so this device allows those farmers to access microclimatic forecasts. It allows them to understand when disease events are likely, and it helps them to reduce the amount of pesticides that they spray and the amount of water that they use. So the big savings here is quite a bit of water, quite a bit of pesticide reduction, and overall extending the area of sustainable cultivation. And this company has grown quite a bit. We've got some big announcements coming out here soon. And finally, third study would be, next slide, would be ARIA. And ARIA is really building the modern digital supply chain infrastructure for India. So it's one of the largest networks of storage and warehouses in India for agricultural commodities. And so it's building out that infrastructure, but it also provides financing to farmers that store in that infrastructure. So if you think about, you're a small wheat farmer, and at the time of harvest, you want to sell your wheat, but that's actually when prices are at their lowest. And so if you can store, right, and sell 3, 6, 9 months later, you can take advantage of the cyclicality in wheat prices and make much more money. But like everyone, you have expenses at home, right? You have bills to pay. And so low cost financing enables you to get an upfront loan for the at a very fair interest rate for the commodities that you store in the ARIA warehouse system. And that lets you meet your household expenses while allowing you to take advantage of low-cost storage and then market linkages to help you sell at a much higher price. So ARIA's are working with quite a number of farmers, scaling very rapidly. Big announcement coming here as well. But yeah, we're very proud of the work that they're doing. So those are 3 representative companies from our portfolio. When we talk about kind of the system as a whole, next slide. It's important to understand that once upon a time, there was almost no investment in Indian agri-tech, right? We were the first. We were doing this back when the annual investment into Indian agri-tech was closer to 14 million. By 2015-16, in the Indian financial year, that had reached 45 million. And by our measurements and data, that crossed 500 million in the financial year that ended March of 2021. But the thing to understand about this funding is highly, highly, highly concentrated. It's concentrated really around the full stack themes that we talked about: farmer platforms and fintech, B2B agri marketplaces, and farm to consumer brands. Much less of it goes to the deep tech themes of precision agriculture and post-harvest technologies, and almost none of it goes into agri-food life sciences. I wrote here entrepreneurial wasteland to be controversial, because it's not only that there's negligible VC funding, but there are barely any startups to fund. I can think of 10, and most of those are at pre-seed stage, not even a seed stage. So, if you look at success stories in this space, from our portfolio, we have one called Barracks, which has turned reasonably okay. It's been an uphill battle because getting funding has been difficult. And then there's another very nice one called String Bio that was done by some other funds in India. That is working on converting methane into sources of protein. This is a space that needs help. There are barely any startups to fund. Heroic efforts have been made by DBT, BIRAC, and CCAMP, which are all different institutions affiliated with the Indian government, but there's very little to show for it at this point. And catalyzing agri-food requires public-private partnerships. And as I've been saying to folks at the Kingdom of the Netherlands in their embassy, folks on this call, I truly believe that the Netherlands is the ideal partner to help India reboot this sector. There's a lot of general attention that is paid to, let's support agri-startups in India, let's do presentations, let's, help these companies access the Netherlands or help Dutch startups access India. I think we need to really focus, because I think the market, the private market, players like Omnivore, but also much larger players, they're very focused on helping accelerate this space, but it's all full stack, it's all digital. There's nothing going to agri-food life sciences. And this is where I feel, right, Dutch government support, right, and public-private partnership can make a real difference that the private market is not addressing. And so I am becoming an evangelist for this space. We are doing some deals here, 3 that I can think of right now. They're all very early pre-seed bets to try to get more attention. I mean, they're good entrepreneurs as well, but to try to start focusing our own efforts here to set an example. But we need to help this ecosystem as a whole. So that's something that I hope this presentation and others will generate some discussion, and we can turn those discussions into concrete outcomes. Thank you.
Well, Mark, thank you so much. I fully agree with you, and I think that was also the idea that we had about this webinar. We want to trigger the Dutch, but also the Indians to team up. And I think that you can't do this also without support from governments. And Dutch government is very strong in facilitating public-private partnerships. So when we come to the Q&A, I'm very interested to learn what the people who are listening to us today, what they have to say about and what kind of ideas that they have. Thank you so much. I would like to hand over to Michiel. Michiel, our agriculture counselor based in Delhi. Welcome, Michiel. Well, you've heard now the stories from Mark and Ishira. Normally you're the ones who welcomes a webinar, but this time we wanted to do differently. We wanted to hear your views on what has been said today. What is your opinion about it? Do you see any challenges or opportunities? So over to you, Michiel.
Well, thank you, Davinia, and thank you for giving me this opportunity, exactly as you said, to be at the end, to reflect on what I just heard. I heard a lot that coincides with what we from the Dutch government, also in our talks with Indian government, discuss. As Ishira mentioned in her opening statement, the post-harvest losses that are huge here in India, the low productivity, the water-stressed economy, as she mentioned it. Those are topics that are also important for us. We look at the food security situation in India as such, but also see that India, and this also was mentioned, can become the food basket of the world, which can be a very important role to play in the future. As I said, I just picked up a few, I might call them buzzwords, but they are very important. And I think this is also where we as a government have our role to play. Sorry. Yes, there is a role for government, but only government can't do it on their own. We have to do it together. And I think that's one of the strong points of the Dutch ecosystem. It's what is sometimes called the Golden Triangle or the Dutch Diamond, whatever name you call. What we mean to say is the cooperation between government, business, knowledge institutes, and NGOs as well. And that's usually the Dutch Diamond creative there. And that's also the strong point, I think, of what we as the Netherlands have to offer. I usually, as a joke, say, well, it ain't much if it ain't Dutch. But I think that what we have to offer as the Dutch is exactly this approach of cooperation between different partners in an ecosystem. And I'm talking specifically about system. And I heard Mark say it at a certain moment that we're talking about systems, but quite often we are thinking still too much linearly in chains. I think it's not a chain thing we're talking about now. We have to offer this total approach where we include the climate action and the sustainability, as mentioned by Mark. We are focusing more and more with our work in government on how we can support the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm very pleased to hear from Mark, for example, how much omnivore in this case, but I see this with many companies, specifically also in the Netherlands, really make a focus in their work also on these SDGs and take the responsibility that we all have globally. What I thought was very interesting was, and Ishira mentioned this, the connections to the new developments, the big baskets. As they were speaking, I just got an invitation again to do my ordering at an organic organization which connects farmers to consumers. I think it's also very important to keep an eye on consumers. The COVID crisis has also changed their attitude towards their food. Even if it is still a small amount, even let it be 1% of the Indian population that is interested in antibiotics-free, organic, safe products. 1% of a consumer market of 1.3 billion people is quite a lot, I can tell you, making it interesting also for Dutch companies. The AgTech has been clearly on our minds today, but it is a very important aspect also for our work. And I fully agree with Mark when he says, well, let's not think that it's from the Dutch side just bringing in our knowledge. It's companies like IntelloLab, like Cropin, which were mentioned by both speakers, that have already gone the other way. And that is also why we as a Dutch government are looking more and more and working on this, on creating a platform where Dutch and Indian startups, usually scale-ups actually, because startups is a bit early, but where they can interact. And this would be also something for the Dutch or the Dutch company listeners that I would say, well, remember, it's a two-way road. It's not just from the Netherlands to India. It's also definitely from India to the Netherlands. It's talking about an exchange of knowledge. Sometimes a Dutch company might face a certain challenge in its product and then find actually the solution in India. That is what we should be looking for. And I agree finally with Mark on his saying, well, the too little attention has been paid to life science, to the possibilities that are on offer there. We are talking, of course, there about something which is sometimes politically slightly challenging to speak about. I mean, within Europe, we haven't even agreed on what is possible. If we talk about these fantastic opportunities that CRISPR-Cas, for example, offers to improve the quality of seeds, to make seeds more climate resilient, actually just what Mark was asking for, in a very easy way, much easier than it used to be in the past, where it would take years and years to develop these kind of seeds. This has become much more easy, but it has certain societal challenges to introduce these new technologies. I'm very willing to pick up where Mark said, well, there's the role of government. This is, I think, a discussion that we have to open. We have to break it open to make it possible. And maybe finally, a remark I would like to make, also reflecting on what we have seen in the Netherlands over the past, 1-2 years, the protest by the farmers in the Netherlands. I'm not even talking about the protest that Ishira mentioned concerning the farm bills, but those protests came, and I'm telling about this in the Netherlands because it's something we have to keep in mind if we talk about smallholders in India. One of the reasons for the farmers to demonstrate was that they felt not empowered in relation to the big retailers. The big retailers in the Netherlands, the farmers felt, were pushing the prices down, were not offering the room to the farmers to produce how they wanted and what they wanted, and that is one of the reasons why the farmers came out. There were many other reasons, also protests against governmental organization reasons, but I think this is something we really have to keep in mind. The resilience that Mark was talking about is, I think, extremely important, but also be aware of companies like Big Basket, for example, or Tata actually just taking over, and the role that they will be playing in this system. This is also, I think, part of the fear for the farm bills that we saw last year. Farmers are afraid to lose their, let's call it, independence. Don't know how much independence they have at present, but still, we should make sure that the transparency, and this has also been mentioned, transparency in the system is also there for the farmers to benefit, to see what happens with their product, to see for the consumers how much of the price that they're paying is actually going to the farmer. Once more, there are more and more consumers, and I think this is a group quite often neglected by us, the power of the consumers to be able to influence the way that we look at agriculture. These are just some reflections I would like to share with you. Last one, just a message I got this morning in the Financieel Dagblad, let's say the Financial Times of the Netherlands, that the Moody rating, credit ratings for India went up. The expectations for Moody for the growth of GDP and economy are well up. So I would say this is really the moment for Dutch entrepreneurs to come to India, to look for opportunities, to look for partners. That's an important fact. I think it's important to find your partners that can support you. Remember, made in India, make in India. It's an important thing that, of course, Indian government will call out to us. They say, well, come on, don't bring your tomatoes, bring us your tomato seeds, bring us your greenhouses. That is what we are looking for. This is also support of our policy in the Netherlands. We think it's much more important to use the knowledge and technology we have in the Netherlands to make agriculture more resilient, more climate smart, and more sustainable. I'll leave it at this. Davinia, back to you.
Great, thanks, Michiel. Actually, I think it's me that's going to jump in here. Thank you for your remarks.
Thank you, Michiel. Yeah, I will hand it over to Ed.
Yeah. And I'll come back to you, Michiel, in a second to pick up on one of the questions in the chat window. First, I'm going to go to Mark, though, and just to try and pick up on and dig it a little bit into, I guess, your comment about the opportunity or lack of progress in the life sciences space. What is it that you think that PPP can achieve that, I guess, hasn't been achieved thus far? What is it about that?
So I think a lot of the efforts on life sciences, on agri-food life sciences in India, have been very centered on sort of pure technology, or generally how these very early stage life sciences technologies can become startups. They have not really focused on on two elements that I think are very critical. One is getting testing done in respected international institutions to prove that these new technologies work. And the second is looking from the perspective of commercialization of these technologies. So some of the efforts that exist by DBT, CCAM, BIRAC, they've been a level before that. And so I think, if you can build support around, getting formal agricultural testing done and supporting commercialization, that would go a long way to helping to advance this ecosystem. So I could see with an institution like Wageningen, right, the ability to start piloting and trialing some of these technologies in, rigorous international controlled settings. And that would really, I think, help these startups be able to access international funding, working around the fact that there are so few investors in the Indian ecosystem that are equipped to even look at life sciences deals. And then, if whatever we build can have a strong level of commercialization support, these companies, historically, a lot of these companies tried to build their own field forces, which is insane for a small startup. And, with all of these platforms like DeHat, or with international partnerships, you could actually be able to commercialize these technologies in a much more efficient manner today, as opposed to, say, 10 years back. But I think fundamentally, there just needs to be much more handholding and much more support in this space.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Mark. Wise words there. Maybe I'll come to Ishira now, and just pick up, I suppose, some observations from your experience, Ishira. I mean, I suppose you're in a situation where in the past you've been the startup, you've led a startup, now you find yourself advising organizations. How have you seen the local landscape in India change through that period? And I guess particularly from a kind of foreign investor perspective, or maybe investor's the wrong word, but from a foreign participant perspective as they look to collaborate.
So I would say, Ed, that the market has matured, over the last few years in terms of both consumers and companies, where, I mean, I guess what we saw in the early phases of the, agri sort of boom in India was like, 1,000 flowers bloom approach, where there were like all kinds of startups coming up. But I think now there is a better sense of what consumers want, what models work. And there has been some sort of a weeding that has already happened, where it has made sense. We are already seeing consolidation happen, right? So I think if you're looking at it from the outside in, that initial flurry of all kinds of special, I'm also talking more from a consumer facing perspective. And in some cases, models like what Mark is saying, the full stack models, the input models or the post-harvest models. I think a lot of there is a pretty good understanding of what needs to be done and how you can go about doing it. And that's where I think the market has matured, and that's what shows the change. Also the fact that now bigger companies, whether it's bigger VCs or bigger companies like Tata, are interested in the ag space, again shows a certain level of progression that the industry has seen. So I mean, I see the sector only benefiting more going forward with this clarity that has emerged. Like Mikhail touched upon it, I think COVID has also given rise to a more conscious consumer. People are in general thinking a bit more about what they're eating, and that kind of is good, right? Like, because if there are companies supplying interesting products, there is a bigger take up of them. So I think that's what is changing. And one other aspect that's also, I think, changing is that the kind of entrepreneurs also coming into this space. I mean, when I had started my company in 2013, like we were all, everyone was like, it was very exciting and to do something new. But I think now you have a lot of seasoned entrepreneurs also like viewing agriculture as like the next big thing in India, and it should be, right? I mean, it employs half of the country pretty much. So I think we're going to see only better and more intelligent minds go, applying themselves to this sector. And the next decade or 2 decades will probably see a big shift in the way, this whole ag and food space evolves in India. So yeah, this is what I would say has changed. And I guess it would be attractive from a foreign investor or company perspective, to see this evolution. It's probably a better time to make an entry now than maybe earlier.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks, Ishira. And I'll come finally to Michiel before we hand back to Davinia to wrap up. Michiel, obviously you've been on the ground in India a relatively short period of time. We've had a couple of questions trying to look into the poultry space, and I'm aware that this is an area that you've been actively involved in during your early time in India, and likely from your substantial experience before that. I just wondered if you could make a couple of comments in terms of how you see, I guess, the challenge and opportunity in that sector.
Absolutely, Ed. And in the chat also, Davinia also already mentioned the AMR, if I may call so, AMR in poultry breakout session that we will be having next week during the India Business Days, as organized by the Netherlands Enterprise Agency on the 12th of October. I don't know if registration is still open, but I would gladly invite all the listeners and viewers to this seminar. Yes, we do see opportunities in the poultry sector. But again, I mean, the approach here is, let's approach it from a different angle. We're looking at the use of antibiotics in the poultry sector. I'm also talking to my colleague here, the health counselor, about zoonosis in for example, the poultry sector, the transfer of how convenient the transfer of viruses from animals to humans. So that's our starting point. And then my question is, well, okay, if that's the starting point, if we want to reduce that, what opportunities are there to improve the technology in the farm, the use of different feeds, the increasing the hygiene? What opportunities are there? Now, we have a lot of knowledge of that in the Netherlands, and we are trying to combine this knowledge with the growing need worldwide, but also in India, for antibiotic-free products. So yes, I do see definite opportunities. I think in general, it's a good thing. I mean, we've been talking about finance. Finance is not easy to access, but it is there in India. Also from the government side, there is money, there's corporate money, there's venture money coming in the sector and wanting to start this finance. And I agree with Mark, it's not enough yet. There is not enough attention yet, but it is growing. I mean, we saw the graph that Mark showed. There is a growing interest there. Let's see how we also can use this for the poultry sector, which is a very interesting sector, maybe also for exports. And if India wants to think about its exports, I mean, we have a changed attitude towards the export of products, but India can become an important partner. But in that case, they will have to improve traceability. They will have to improve quality of the product. Otherwise, I'm talking for the EU, but I'm talking also worldwide. Otherwise, the world will not accept the products from India. So they will have to work on that. I'll leave it at there, Ed.
Thank you. Maybe Ed, I also see another question. I think maybe Mark can help us with that. Is that somebody's asking how we can benefit of this webinar? If we can set up any platform or do you have an idea with all the portfolio members that you have? Is there anything that we could use? How we could create some kind of community with ideas, and then what somebody picks up the glove and then we really do something with it. You
Well,
have some
look,
ideas
I mean,
on that part?
I think if we're looking at doing something in agri-food life sciences, you need to create a community from scratch, because it's just not there, and it's not there in any of the kind of communities at nonprofits or platforms that currently exist. I think my email address is on the page, so if anyone wants to talk with me about any particular company, I'm very happy to discuss.
Great. Ed, over to you.
Well, I think we've come to the end of the Q&A session. So and Michiel did a perfect job in the teaser for next week's session. So Davinia, I'll hand back to you to wrap up.
Okay, thank you so much, Ed. Maybe short final slide. First of all, I want to thank all the speakers of today. I think it's quite interesting, and you can only discuss that, you only have an hour. So I think if we really go into depth, we need more sessions like this, but it's a start. As already mentioned by Michiel, we have some upcoming events also this week. The Larive is focusing on India already the whole week. So we also have a Meet the Expert session on Friday. If you have specific questions on entering or doing business in India, or you want to discuss one of the ideas that have been raised today, please contact us and sign up for Meet the Expert for this Friday. Additionally, we have a webinar on opportunities in the poultry sector with a specific focus on AMR. Larive and Salames 4, we have performed a study for the Dutch government. It will also be put out in a couple of weeks from now, but next week we have a seminar about this. First of all, more informative session and also Q&A session. So if you're interested, you can still sign up, and it's maybe short. He will also provide all of you with the link how to sign up for this interesting webinar. So thank you all. Any question, please reach out to us. You know how to find us now. And Mark, Michiel, Ishira, Ed, Sjoerd, thank you for all the work done, and have a good day. Thank you so much.